It was one of those moments that made you stop and think, did that really just happen? The kind of moment that leaves your heart racing, your palms sweaty, and your mind spinning with questions. Picture this, a quiet afternoon in the bustling heart of the city, where the hum of life never seems to pause. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the streets, and there, in the middle of it all, stood two tiny figures, identical in every way. They were twins, no older than 7, with wide, pleading eyes that seemed to hold the weight of the world. But it wasn't just their size or their matching outfits that caught everyone's attention. It was the fact that they were standing in front of Big Shaq, the larger-than-life internet sensation known for his booming voice, quick wit, and heart of gold. And they were begging him for help. The crowd around them had grown silent, their phones out, recording every second of what was unfolding. You could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy, like the calm before a storm. The twins, dressed in little black hoodies and sneakers, looked up at Big Shaq with a desperation that was hard to ignore. Their tiny voices trembled as they spoke, their words spilling out in a rush. "Please, Big Shaq," one of them said, his voice cracking. "We need your help. It's our mom. She's gone, and we don't know what to do." The other twin nodded, tears streaming down his face, his small hands clutching the hem of his hoodie like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. Big Shaq, usually the life of the party, the guy who could turn any situation into a laugh, stood frozen. His usual confident grin was gone, replaced by a look of shock and concern. He knelt down to their level, his towering frame suddenly seeming so much smaller as he looked into their eyes. "What do you mean she's gone?" he asked, his voice softer than anyone had ever heard it. The twins exchanged a glance, their fear palpable. She left last night," the first twin whispered. "She said she'd be back, but she's not answering her phone, and we're scared." The second twin added, "We don't have anyone else to turn to? Please, Big Shaq, you're the only one who can help us." The crowd around them was buzzing now, whispers spreading like wildfire. What had started as a chance encounter was quickly turning into something much bigger, much deeper. Big Shaq's mind was racing. He wasn't just a comedian or a viral sensation. He was a person, a human being with a heart that was breaking for these two little boys. But what could he do? He wasn't a detective or a social worker, he was just Shaq. Yet as he looked at their tear-streaked faces, he knew he couldn't walk away. Not from this. Not from them. But before he could say anything, before he could even process what was happening, one of the twins reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and crumpled. It was a piece of paper, folded neatly, with shaky handwriting scrawled across it. "She left this," the twin said, holding it out to Big Shaq with trembling hands. "We don't know what it means, but we think it's important." Big Shaq took the paper, his fingers brushing against the boys as he unfolded it. His eyes scanned the words, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. His face went pale, his usual bravado replaced by something far more serious. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The twins looked at each other, their fear growing. "We found it in her room," one of them said, "after she left." The crowd was on edge now, their phones still recording, their breaths held. What was on that paper? What had Big Shaq seen that had shaken him so deeply? He looked back at the twins, his mind racing. "We need to find her," he said finally, his voice firm but laced with urgency. "But it's not going to be easy. There are things here, things I don't understand." The twins nodded, their eyes wide with a mix of hope and fear. "Will you help us?" they asked, their voices barely audible. Big Shaq took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling as he weighed his options. He knew this wasn't going to be simple. He knew there were risks, dangers even. But as he looked at those two little faces, he knew he didn't have a choice. "Yeah," he said finally, his voice steady. "I'll help you, but we need to move fast." And just like that, the tone shifted. What had started as a chance encounter on a busy street was now a race against time. Big Shaq and the twins were about to embark on a journey that would take them deep into the heart of the city, into places they never imagined they'd go, and face challenges they never thought they'd have to face. But as they turned to leave, as the crowd parted to let them through, one question lingered in the air, heavy and unspoken. What was on that piece of paper? And what did it mean for the twins, for Big Shaq, and for the mother who had vanished? Without a trace. The answers were out there somewhere, but finding them wouldn't be easy. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in shadows, one thing was clear. This was only the beginning. The streets were alive with the usual chaos of the city, honking cars, chatter from sidewalk vendors, and the distant hum of music spilling out of open windows. But for Big Shaq and the twins, the world felt eerily quiet, as if they were moving through a bubble of their own. The twins stuck close to Shaq, their small hands gripping the edges of his jacket as they navigated the crowded sidewalks. People stared as they passed, some recognizing Shaq and whispering to each other. But no one dared to interrupt. There was something about the trio, the urgency in their steps, the tension in their faces, that made even the nosiest onlookers keep their distance. Shaq's mind was racing as they walked. The note the twins had given him was burning a hole in his pocket, its words replaying in his head over and over. It wasn't just a note, it was a riddle, a clue, something that felt like it belonged in a mystery novel, not real life. The handwriting was messy, hurried, as if the person who wrote it was in a panic. It read, "If you're reading this, I'm already gone. Look for the place where the lights never shine. Find the key, and you'll find me. But be careful. They're watching." Who was they? What key? And where on earth was a place where the lights never shone in a city that never slept? Shaq had no answers, only questions, and the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. The twins, meanwhile, were silent, their usual chatter replaced by a quiet determination. Every now and then one of them would glance up at Shaq, as if checking to make sure he was still there, still with them. They didn't say much, but their eyes told a story of their own. Fear, yes, but also a flicker of hope. They had trusted Shaq with their secret, with their mother's disappearance, and now they were counting on him to make things right. It was a lot for anyone to carry, let alone two little kids. As they turned down a quieter side street, Shaq finally broke the silence. "You said your mom left last night," he began, his voice gentle but probing. "Did she say anything before she went? Anything at all that might help us figure out where she is?" The twins exchanged a glance, and the taller one, his name was Malik, spoke up. "She was acting weird all day," he said, his voice small but steady. "Like, nervous. She kept looking out the window like she was waiting for someone. And then she got a phone call, and she went into her room and closed the door. When she came out, she told us she had to go out for a little while, but she'd be back soon." His brother Jamal nodded, adding, "She said not to worry, but she looked scared, and then she just left." Shaq frowned, his brow furrowing as he processed their words. "Did you hear anything from the phone call? A voice, a name, anything?" The twins shook their heads. "No," Malik said, "but after she left we found the note in her room. It was under her pillow, like she didn't want anyone to find." It. Shaq's stomach churned. This wasn't just a case of a mom needing some space or running errands. Something was wrong, seriously wrong. And the more he learned, the more he realized how little he knew. They kept walking, the city's noise fading into the background as Shaq tried to piece things together. The note mentioned a place where the lights never shine. What did that mean? An alleyway? A basement? Somewhere underground? And then there was the key. Was it a literal key, or was it a metaphor for something else? Shaq's head was spinning, but he knew one thing for sure. They couldn't do this alone. They needed help. Someone who knew the city inside and out. Someone who could navigate its hidden corners and dark secrets. That's when it hit him. There was one person who might be able to help. A friend of his named Rico, who ran a small repair shop in the heart of the city. Rico was the kind of guy who knew everyone and everything. If anyone could make sense of the note, it was him. Shaq turned to the twins. "I know someone who might be able to help us," he said. But we need to be careful. If your mom was being watched, we don't know who's involved or how far this goes. We have to stay low-key, okay?" The twins nodded, their eyes wide, but determined. They made their way to Rico's shop, a small, unassuming place tucked between a laundromat and a bodega. The sign above the door was faded, and the windows were covered with posters, but Shaq knew this was the place. He pushed the door open, the bell above it jingling softly, and stepped inside. The shop was cluttered with tools, spare parts, and half-finished projects, but it had a cozy, lived-in feel. Rico was behind the counter, his head bent over a broken radio, but he looked up as they entered. His face broke into a grin when he saw Shaq. "Well, well, look who it is," he said, his voice warm but teasing. "Big Shaq in the flesh. What brings you to my humble abode?" Shaq didn't waste time with small talk. "Rico, I need your help," he said, his tone serious. "It's important." Rico's smile faded as he took in Shaq's expression, the twins standing nervously behind him. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice dropping. Shaq pulled out the note and handed it to Rico. "We're trying to find their mom," he said, nodding toward the twins. "She's missing, and this is the only clue we have, but I don't know what it means." Rico took the note, his eyes scanning the words. For a long moment he was silent, his face unreadable. Then he looked up, his expression grim. "This isn't good," he said. "If this is what I think it is, you're dealing with something dangerous." The twins' eyes widened, and Shaq felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" he asked. Rico hesitated, then leaned in closer, his voice low. "There's a place in the city," he said. "A place most people don't know about. It's underground, hidden. They call it the Shadow Market. It's where people go when they don't want to be found, when they're in trouble. If your mom's mixed up in that, it's not good news." Shaq's heart sank. The Shadow Market, he'd heard rumors, whispers, but he'd never thought it was real. And now it seemed they had no choice but to go there. Rico looked at the twins, then back at Shaq. "I'll help you," he said finally. "But you need to know what you're getting into. This isn't a game. If we go down there, there's no guarantee we'll come back up." Shaq nodded, his jaw set. "We don't have a choice," he said. "We have to find her." Rico studied him for a moment, then sighed. "All right," he said. "But we need to move fast, and we need to be smart. If they are watching, we can't afford any mistakes." As Rico gathered a few things from behind the counter, Shaq turned to the twins. "You guys okay?" he asked, his voice softer now. They nodded, but their faces were pale, their fear evident. Shaq crouched, down to their level, looking them in the eye. "We're going to find your mom," he said. "But you have to trust me, okay? No matter what happens, we're in this together." The twins nodded again, their small hands gripping his. In that moment, Shaq felt a surge of determination. He didn't know what they were walking into, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let these kids down. As they left the shop, the city seemed darker somehow, the shadows deeper, the air heavier. The Shadow Market was out there, waiting, and with it, the answers they so desperately needed. But as they stepped into the night, Shaq couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Somewhere in the darkness, unseen eyes were following their every move, and whoever was behind those eyes, they weren't friendly. The game was on, and the stakes were higher than ever. But for now, all they could do was keep moving forward, one step at a time, into the unknown.